Hi, welcome to the Palestine Solidarity interview series. I'm Katie Miranda, and I'm here today with Lara Kiswani from the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC, in San Francisco. She was one of the people who was behind the successful Block the Boat protest in Oakland last fall, and that stopped the Israeli Zim shipping lines from ever docking and unloading in Oakland again. And so I'm talking to Lara. So, Lara, tell us a little bit about AROC. What current issues are you guys working on, and what do you do?
So AROC is based out of San Francisco. We do direct services and organizing, and that's our model is to provide services to meet the material needs of our community in order to make it possible for folks to be more involved and engaged in political work. So we provide immigration services to low-income Arab and Muslim immigrants, and we do organizing for our adult and youth membership. The issues that we focus on are really the issues that are most important for our community right now, and those are around repression and war and militarism. So our legal services are also framed around the ways in which forced migration, brings folks into our offices, and a lot of times our legal services involve protecting and defending our community against law enforcement repression. So that's one area of work, as well as, of course, war and militarism, which continues to plague our region at the hands of the United States.
So you were one of the driving forces behind the Block the Boat protests in Oakland. And can you elaborate a little bit on the significance of that victory?
So last summer, when Gaza was being bombed and when Palestine was being terrorized by the state of Israel, folks back home in Palestine were, resisting Israeli apartheid, and folks here in the United States and all over the world were also participating and supporting that resistance. And in the Bay Area, we held a series of mobilizations over the summer, mobilizing thousands of our community and allies to raise awareness about what was happening. But we also decided that there needed to be a campaign that actually made a direct impact on the state of Israel. So AROC, along with over 70 organizations that were endorsing the campaign, led basically the effort to work with the workers at the Port of Oakland, the longshoremen, ILW Local 10, which has a history of being a very militant labor movement, labor union that actually has supported various social justice struggles over the course of history. So we work with them and we work with our allies to stop the Israeli Zim ship from docking at the Port of Oakland. We did so for one day. We mobilized thousands of people, 5 a.m., and we mobilized again in the afternoon. We did so the next day. And we were able to stop the Israeli Zim ship from docking or unloading at the Port of Oakland for 4 consecutive days. When we realized how successful we were, the community was really galvanized around it. This is the largest shipping company from the state of Israel, and it brings not only consumer goods and products, but it actually also brings weapons that are used on Black and brown communities here in the United States. And the Port of Oakland is one of the largest ports. So we were able to go again, and people organized in September. We then again organized in October. And as a result, the Israeli Zim ship is not set or scheduled to dock in California or Florida anytime. So we don't know if it'll come again. It may come again, but we do know we have the resources and the skills now to organize to stop it from ever coming again.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize it was all of California.
Yeah, because when we called for it in Oakland, we also called on our allies all over the West Coast to do the same thing. So there were actions actually in Seattle, actions in Southern California, and actions in Florida in solidarity, and in New York and in Vancouver in solidarity with Block the Boat. And some actions were successful in stopping the ship from unloading for a period of time. But Oakland was by far the most successful and was able, I think, accumulatively, because of the work we did all around the country, stop the ship from ever docking again in California, for now at least.
Great. So
Yeah.
how did you manage to organize such a broad coalition of people, and did you face any challenges in drumming up such a large amount of cross-movement support for this issue?
I think there's inherently cross-movement support for the issue of Palestine, given that the state of Israel plays a role globally in suppressing and repressing and targeting Black and brown communities. And I think people can they make it easy for us to make those connections. So in California and in the Bay Area specifically, there's a long history of cross-movement building between the Palestinian community, in the Latin American community, the indigenous community, Asians and Africans and Black community members. So it was pretty easy in terms of getting support. I think where the challenge is around the organizing strategies and tactics. So, by far that was, it was a very big learning curve in terms of it was like a crash course on labor organizing because we work with ILW Local 10. We went into this being very clear that we did not want to do anything that impacted the workers negatively. We wanted to get their buy-in. So I think the hardest part was working on that particular part of that issue. So going in the union hall every morning and afternoon, talking to the rank and file, making sure that they knew what was happening and why we were going to be out there and what we were asking of them. And that was, part and parcel of the work. We had ILW Local 10 members in our organizing meetings. And, the other thing is we wanted to centralize Arab leadership. And so the principles by which this coalition came together were centralizing Arab leadership, working with the workers, and also intended on long-term movement building. So it was easy once we laid that framework and that foundation for the coalition work to be able to get the work done within that direction. Had we not spent the time to be intentional about how we're doing the work, we may have, ended up doing an action just for action's sake. We may have done an action that really didn't centralize the needs and the vision and demands of the Arab community, or done an action that actually impacted the workers negatively. And all those things wouldn't have actually contributed to the liberation of Palestine, because the liberation of Palestine entails the liberation of all oppressed people and working with people and also organizing for the long term.
So have you been in touch with other labor leaders in other port cities around the U.S.? I know you mentioned Florida, but is there anything else in the U.S. or the rest of the world going on now in regards to blocking the Zim ships?
There is no need now to do it in California or Florida, but it does still come to New Orleans and New York. And as you know, New York is a very different context. The port is very different than the West Coast or Florida. So there was conversations about continuing to build on the Block the Vote campaign, and we definitely encourage people to do that. There's no cookie cutter way to do it. People would call on us for ways in which to do the same type of action in different parts of the country or the world, and our response was always, it depends on the local dynamics, the different organizations on the ground, how organized and militant is the union and the labor force there, and also how organized is the Arab community. So it sort of depends on the different regions, but we're in conversation, and the conversation has shifted a bit. So the Block the Vote, we had regular calls and meetings, Skype calls. We had different conference calls over the summer with people all over the country about how to strategize together to have a really strong movement to stop the Israeli Zim ship. But the intention was never just the Israeli Zim ship. The intention was to really amplify boycott, divestment, sanctions, and to do so through direct action that also involves community members on the ground and mobilizing people. So BDS is really the long-term goal, to isolate Israel, isolate apartheid, make it as difficult as possible for Israel to do business anywhere. And so people are having conversations now about building on Block the Vote to continue to expose the role of Israel in repression and policing here locally around this country, specifically in Black and brown communities and poor communities. So some folks are talking about G4S campaigns. Locally in the Bay Area, we're talking about just exposing how in the San Francisco Police Department and Oakland Police Department get trained by the State of Israel each year, and how that actually impacts the experiences and livelihood of people here. So the conversations go in various directions, but the Israeli Zim ship does still come to the United States, and it is worthwhile to consider ways in which we can stop that from happening.
So there is a very disturbing event going on in Oakland starting on September 11th this year. It's probably not a coincidence that it's September 11th. It's called Urban Shield. Can you tell us about Urban Shield? What is it? Why is it happening? And why should people be concerned about it? And what is AROC doing about it, actually?
So Urban Shield is a training and expo that happens each year. It happens in California, in Texas, and in Boston. And what it is it works with the federal government to bring in law enforcement locally and internationally, as well as different local agencies to participate in trainings around counterterrorism. And you know what it really is they are it's an expo that involves different corporations and governments from all over the world selling surveillance technology and different weapons that are used in poor communities. And then they also do training exercises that mimic potential threats, and most often those entail Arab and Black and Brown communities specifically. So they bring EMTs, local law enforcement, police, city officials, and it's a pretty broad range of things. And activities take place for various days, like 4 days in the Bay Area. So last year we mobilized and we put pressure on the city of Oakland because the city of Oakland was hosting it for the last 7 years. And you know, given the history of Oakland and the anti-policing movement and the ways in which the Black and Brown community have been successful in putting pressure on the city, we worked together to expose not only how this is not needed in our communities and more policing does not make us safer. We know that that's been proven, but also that these activities, this surveillance technology, is really used to create more state violence in local Black and Brown communities. And especially given the fact that they involve the state of Israel. So the state of Israel also participates in Urban Shield trainings. And so we worked together to put pressure on the city, and we were successful in mobilizing and putting pressure on the city to no longer host it in Oakland. But it's Alameda County-wide. It's an ongoing activity that the Alameda County is still hosting. And this year it's happening in Pleasanton. So, and it's important to also note that while it happens in the Bay Area and in Alameda, people from all over the state participate in this training, and actually all over the country. So stopping Urban Shield locally, and AROC is working with a coalition of different organizations, including Critical Resistance, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and the War Resisters League, and bringing in other forces like the National Lawyers Guild and others, local allies, to mobilize more and put more pressure on Alameda County to stop hosting this, not only for the Arab community, not only for Black and Brown communities, but really for people in the Bay Area, but really for people everywhere, because stopping this training will chip away at the state's attempt to continue to repress folks all over the country.
But what's to say that they're just not going to move it to another county, or is your goal to just end Urban Shield, period?
I mean, our goal is to end Urban Shield, period. Our goal is to end all these types of repressive trainings and exercises. And so, yes, absolutely. The intention is not to move it out and go send it to Los Angeles. The intention is to stop Urban Shield completely. And this involves federal funding. So there's grant money, and there's different government money that's actually intended to support these types of activities. So the long-term goal would be to put pressure on the United States government to no longer put money towards these types of activities and trainings. And in the short term, locally, our intention is to just make it as difficult as possible for these types of trainings to happen.
So why is law enforcement in the United States collaborating with states like Israel in this regard, and when did this start?
So Israel has been training repressive regimes for decades. They've done so all over the world. Latin America was definitely a place where they were training people, South Africa, and now, the United States. Israel has perfected surveillance. It's perfected torture. It's perfected repression. They use Palestine as a training, as a different training grounds to learn how to better repress people, how to better police people, how to imprison them, and so these things that they're testing on the testing ground in Gaza specifically, we see that they use different types of chemical weapons every single time they bomb Gaza, and they're bombing Gaza as we speak right now. These types of things are done in Palestine, tested in Palestine, perfected in the interests of the state, and then brought and exported all over the world. Israel also makes a lot of money and profit from this surveillance technology and weaponry and training. So this is part of their income as a state. So they have perfected it, and so the states look to Israel for guidance. And we don't just, it's also worth mentioning, it's not just the United States and local law enforcement here that uses Israel to to train their different agencies, but also Arab regimes. And, we know Jordan, a neighboring country, has Israel training their different, agencies as well. So this is something that's been happening for decades, but more recently, it's become easier to expose. More recently, we know that everybody from board of supervisors and city officials are traveling to Israel each year to meet with other people in the state of Israel to also share in tactics and strategies. So all these types of things are part and parcel of this way in which the state of Israel actually has a very central role in global policing and repression. It's not just that it's coincidental and because Israel is gruesome and apartheid shouldn't exist that we want to challenge this. We actually know it's instrumental for us all to stop Israel from doing this and collaborating with different states, because that will also impact U.S. imperialism. So if we're able to make a dent at this, if we're able to actually stop Israel apartheid from happening, stop Israel global repression from happening at the hands of the state of Israel, we know we will also be able to make an impact and weaken U.S. imperialism.
So can you talk about a little bit more about like the role Israel plays along with the U.S. in global oppression and why building these cross-coalition movements is so important in challenging that? And how can we, like most importantly, how can we challenge this? I mean, what you were just talking about, it's like, it's mind-boggling. It's like, how do you even begin to oppose that?
I mean, you don't have to get involved in a particular campaign to oppose it. Whatever work you're engaged in, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's queer rights, whether it's any policing or prisons, all these types of things, if you just look a little closely or examine or unpack it, you'll see that Israel has a role in it. Israeli corporations, the Israeli government actually have a hand in all social justice movements, because it actually support, in making sure that they repress these movements and international movements for justice will make sure and ensure that the state of Israel continues to exist. The United States and the state of Israel are actually partners. It's not that one supports the other. They're partners. They collaborate to make sure that we are operating within the conditions that we operate within. They make sure that they collaborate and work together to ensure that the prison industrial complex continues as is and continues to grow. The military industrial complex continues to grow. That sectarianism in the region continues to be fueled. So it's a duty on all our parts, both locally and globally, to expose the role that the state of Israel plays in all our different social justice movements. It's also a duty on our part to make sure that colonialism, present modern day colonialism as exists in Palestine, and an anti-colonial movement as we're seeing in Palestine, where people on the ground are resisting this apartheid Israel day in and day out and making the connections. You see on the walls all over Palestine, they're drawing on connections between Ferguson, they're drawing on the connections in Baltimore. They know that there's a direct link between their struggle and other struggles for justice. So it's our duty to also continue to make those links and challenge Israel and the United States in the ways in which they continue to repress all our communities.
So when I talked to you on the phone earlier, we were talking a little bit about Yemen, and I know this, I personally don't really understand what's going on there quite yet. Can you explain what's going on there? Why is the U.S. supporting the Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen, and what is Iraq doing to oppose that?
Well, there's a very large Yemeni community, one of the largest in the United States, right here in the Bay Area. And this has impacted them. This is a very devastating moment because no one ever expected to see Yemen in rubble as we're seeing it today. Yemen is situated at a very geopolitically strategic location for the United States and for Israel. And there's been many years where the Saudi Arabian government has attempted to, crush and control Yemen in various ways. The first place we should always start is the United States and Saudi Arabia are partners. There's a very close relationship between the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And as Arabs, fighting against colonialism, we see Saudi Arabia as a player, an imperialist force in the region. So the Saudi bombing of Yemen goes hand in hand with the United States funding this bombing, supporting them logistically, also providing them weapons, and also having their own drone attacks day in and day out in Yemen. So they have been able to successfully, as we've seen over the last decade, fuel sectarianism in Iraq, fuel sectarianism in Syria, and now they're fueling sectarianism in Yemen. There was a day where no Arab ever identified as Shia or Sunni. These were not things that we talked about if you were, a Muslim, let alone the fact that there's Jewish Arabs and Christian Arabs and secular Arabs. These were not issues for us that caused the types of war and aggression that we're seeing today. This is at the hands of the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And so what they're doing in Yemen is they're continuing to fuel that sectarianism to justify more war and aggression in the region and to make sure that no popular movement can actually thrive. Every time people are organizing, anytime people are resisting the state, there was an uprising in Yemen in 2011 to challenge Ali Abdullah Saleh, the person who was running the regime, the president at that time. And then back then, the United States was making sure to support Ali Abdullah Saleh. And today, they're now supporting the current president. And they put in another puppet president. And as people are resisting that, the United States continues to work with Saudi Arabia to make sure even that resistance is not organized. Even the resistance on the ground to challenge state violence is not organized and actually fueling more state repression and fueling more sectarianism in the region. So that's what we're seeing in Yemen today. It's quite devastating. And there are many nuances. You can read a lot of analysis about who the different players are. We held a forum on Sunday to help create a space for that type of analysis. And we had two speakers who provided a great framework and real, some real basic dropping knowledge, as we say, on what's happening on the ground in Yemen. And it was very useful. And I think it's a starting point for us all to engage in the conversations, to learn, to really unpack these issues, pay closer attention, and to not get sucked in to the demands to have the United States intervene more. Oftentimes, movements and organizations get caught up with this relief work, and when we see devastation in any region, the first thing that we think about is to ask our state to get involved and support the relief work. But really, at the end of the day, it's about asking what role does the United States actually have in what's happening in Yemen. Another thing we've been working on for a couple of years now is Yemeni Americans have been having their passports confiscated by the United States government for the last few years. They've been targeting Yemeni Americans, trying to target them for immigration fraud, people that have been citizens for over 30, 40 years, and confiscating their passports. And then they started closing their embassy in Yemen, making it impossible for processing immigration paperwork for different families to be reunited. And now suddenly we see this bombing campaign. So we don't think this is all coincidental. There's an attempt to crush Yemen, to destroy Yemen, to ruin Yemen, just like there's an attempt to do that all over the region so they can put in place their puppet governments to control the region's resources and land and people. So we've been working and trying to do all we can. We had a protest and a forum, and we're working with the Yemeni community to continue to mobilize and build power locally. We just had a successful win yesterday. Many of the Yemeni people who actually came through, our Yemeni community members, were at the forefront of this, where we got Arabic passed and San Francisco Unified School District as a language pathway, so our young kids can actually learn Arabic and be empowered and celebrate their resilience and their culture and their history in public classrooms. And that's part and parcel of the work of challenging sectarianism, challenging war and aggression, is also building power locally and empowering people with their culture and their history.
So tell me, what is the benefit to Saudi Arabia for all this instability in Yemen?
Well, Saudi Arabia is interested in the same things that the United States and Israel are interested in. And Saudi Arabia has been trying to steal territory from Yemen historically. So they have an interest in the material resources. They have an interest in the port. The Aden port is one of the most important ports in the region. And, having control of Aden, having control of the south is also part and parcel of Saudi Arabia's interest, as well as Israel and the United States. So that's really where it comes from. It's not anything that's that complicated, really. Where it gets complicated is where the different loyalties are of the different players and folks on the ground, like why particular factions are supporting Saudi aggression, or why particular factions are supporting the United States or different sectarian, militias. And I think that's where we have to start to question and look at the history of the different movements in the region. But Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States have very clear interests all over. Saudi Arabia never intervened to support the Palestinian people when Gaza was bombing it.
Right.
Saudi Arabia never intervened to support resistance. Saudi Arabia never supported any of the uprisings in 2011. And now suddenly they're concerned about the Yemeni people. So we know this is a facade. And I think if you just look at on the ground what's happening in Yemen, there's nothing about what's happening in Yemen that someone can say is actually so helpful. None of the objectives that Saudi Arabia put forth, pretending that they were trying to support the Yemeni people and target particular militias, none of that's actually happened. They haven't actually achieved any of the goals that they even set forth, even though within that pretext, we still challenge Saudi Arabia intervening. But if they were really intervening to stop this sectarianism or this war and aggression or to target particular militias, none of that's actually happened. All they've actually done is made Yemen into rubble.
So you told me earlier that AROC is launching a fundraising drive to hire a new lead organizer. And can you tell us a little bit more about that and how people out there can support that?
Well, as based on our conversation, the work that AROC does is not always fundable by foundations and the state. We don't take federal money. We are, the most important thing for our community is for us to maintain our integrity within our politics and our vision for the work that we're doing. And so that depends a lot on grassroots donations. AROC does a lot of amazing work, in coalitions and in the community around, the Bay Area, but we do so with very little resources and very small staff. And one thing we've been lacking and needing is a lead organizer. We don't have someone that's actually the container for the membership building, the container to facilitate all the political education that's needed, but also the campaign work that we're about to embark on. So we're fundraising for a lead organizer. We started last winter and we had a fund drive and we made 30 out of the 50,000 that was needed, and that was great. So we know that we can get money from our own community and really practice self-determination in that way. And now we're trying to raise that remaining 20,000, but we've already put out the announcement that we're hiring a lead organizer. We know we're going to be able to do it. We're really excited to bring somebody on board. We just need some more money to make it happen. And so we're like calling on our community and allies to support us in that effort.
Okay, great. So every month I've been giving $7 from every item purchased from my site to a different nonprofit. And this month, the month of June, I'm going to be supporting AROC in their effort to hire a new lead organizer. So this month, $7 from every item of jewelry or apparel will go to AROC. So go to www.katiemiranda.com and you can make a purchase, and $7 of that will be donated. So thank you very much, Lara, and good luck with everything, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.